This is not your typical ghost story. My parents fixed up houses for a living and had moved the family into their new project, a home built in the 1940s. At the time, I had no paranormal experiences, so at first, when the weird stuff started, ghosts never entered my mind. It began in the middle of the night when I was awoken by my toys that were stacked against the wall being shuffled around. At first, I tried to ignore it, but after a while, it started getting on my nerves. I began getting out of bed to investigate, and I swear, as I got close to my toys, small shadows would run into my closet. We had no pets. Looking inside, I find nothing and would close the door, but in the mornings, it was always open. It wouldn't be wide open, just cracked a few inches. Shutting the door, I pull and pull. It did not budge. No way was it slipping open on its own. The doorknob had to be turned. I finally got smart and took his flashlight to bed with me one night, determined to find out what it was. When the noises woke me, I got up and shined a beam of light on my large dollhouse. It was one of those with the back completely open. In one of the windows, there was a set of glowing green eyes, and it blinked. I said to myself that only something alive blinks, and thought maybe it was a cat or even a raccoon. Again, small shadows dove into the closet when I got close, moving way too fast for me to get a good look at them properly. Tried to tell my mom and dad, but they wouldn't listen, kept chalking it up to my imagination. Well, that didn't make sense. You think if it came from my imagination, I would know what it looked like. I had no clue what it was. Even putting heavy books in front of the closet door could not keep it closed. This went on for a couple months, and I just learned to live with it. That is, until one night, a low voice woke me. It was the little boy's voice, shaking with fear as he said, "He's coming." I'm half awake, but this is how I remember it. Beautiful green eyes greeted me when I opened mine. I mumble out something like, "What? Who is?" Staring at the green eyes, it finally registers that a couple things don't look quite right here. First, the eyes belong to something about 3 times the size of one of my Barbie dolls. It was standing on the edge of my bed and seemed to be naked. The body was humanoid in shape and was completely wrinkled. I'm talking layers and layers of wrinkles, like it had way too much skin. The head was round with no hair, but its chin was somewhat pointy and its mouth real wide, reminding me of the Grinch when it smiles. The only reason I knew it was a boy was because of his voice. But how could it have the eyes and voice of a little boy when it didn't look like one? Remember, I'm still half asleep. It didn't occur to me that something was really wrong with this picture. I was still trying to figure out what it is when a second boy's voice coming from behind my toys startled me by saying, "Hurry, he's coming." I saw real fear spark in the eyes of the thing on my bed. It was terrified, and my heart went out to it. Before jumping off, it turns to me and says in a scared voice, "Run, or he will get you too." It ran into the closet, followed closely by a second shadow. Stupid me gets up to approach and check it out. Opening the door wide to darkness, I could feel it. Something real bad was coming this way. A fear I could not explain had me rooted to the spot. It wasn't until my mom shook me that I realized the screaming I was hearing was coming from me. Must have really shook my parents because they let me sleep with them that night. The next day, I was surprised how easy they gave in when I begged them to allow me to switch rooms with the spare that was in the garage. I never went back into my old bedroom, not even during the day. I was a very happy girl when they finally finished the house and got it sold. I'm not asking anyone to believe my story, but me and my friend know it to be true. About 5 years ago, I was 14 back then. My best friend and I walked over to McDonald's to get something to eat. It was only a 20-minute walk from my apartment. It was about 10 p.m. when we started back and were walking beside a low brick wall next to a donut store alongside a few other little stores when we both saw movement out of the corner of our eyes. Something was on the side of the donut shop. "Do you see that?" we both asked at the same time. Would have never paid attention if it hadn't been moving. It was one of those moments where you question yourself on whether your eyes are deceiving you with a trick image. In silence, we stared hard at the wall. All I saw was a dark, odd human looking shape about 8 feet tall, and it had two arms and two legs that were unnaturally long, around 5 feet. It was weird watching it crawl up towards the roof, each limb delicately placed like a spider. Needless to say, my friend Chris and I were scared shitless, so we ran to the end of the street. By the time I looked back, it was already on the rooftop, but when I saw it, I can tell it was looking back at us. So it had seen us. Fear surged through my heart, pumping to all parts of my body. Chris screamed at me to keep running, and I did all the way home. Sorry to say, it never occurred to either of us to stop long enough to take a picture. Forget that. It took me almost a month before I could make myself go outside after dark again. Never told my parents, who would never have believed me, yet they knew something had me scared, but could never bring themselves to ask me what. Chris and I kept our eyes wide open at night from then on out. We both know just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's still not out there, somewhere. I had a few years to think about it and have come up with the conclusion that it was not actually a person, but maybe some kind of undiscovered giant spider species. Whatever it was, still gives me the chills just talking about it. A video on YouTube showing a creature climbing a building in Russia looks similar to what we saw, but nowhere near that big. I've had nightmares where the creature grows after reaching the roof of the donut shop and starts acting like Godzilla by stomping on all the buildings and chasing us. My experience happened a week before my mother was killed in a car accident. I laid awake in bed, not wanting to fall asleep because I often suffered from night terrors. I was watching as the light bounced off the wall when all of a sudden I heard what I could only imagine was my mother in heels slowly walking back to her room. Weird, I didn't see or hear her pass by my door on the way out. I called out, "Mom?" As the footsteps neared my door, I called out again, "Mom?" Why wasn't she answering? I started to call out once more, but then my voice and all movements of my body stopped in shock as I saw the woman who had stepped in front of my door. She was wearing a black lace gown with a long black veil. The ankle boots with the buttons on the side hovering just a few inches off the floor looked to be the kind women wore in the 1800s. She stopped dead center of my door, slowly turned her head and looked at me, but I couldn't see her face because of the veil. Her right hand moved up, and for a second I thought she was going to lift it, but she let her hand slip back down to her side. I did notice she wore a heavy signet ring on her forefinger. Slowly turning her head back down the hall, she continued her way to my mother's room. I heard the door slowly creak open, a few more steps, and the door close again. Who was this, and what was she doing in our house? I also thought it very strange that this woman seemed to be floating, yet I heard the clicking footsteps of her heeled boots as if she was walking on the floor. I ran to my mother's room in panic and burst in without knocking. My mom woke up in fright and stared at me like I was a madman as I searched in her closet, under her bed, and behind furniture, while at the same time trying to blabber out that a woman all dressed in black just came into her room. She tucked me back into bed, assuring me that was just another night terror. Okay. Years later, at a family reunion, several of us got on the paranormal subject, and one of my cousins was telling us about his encounter with a ghost. A couple of years ago, his favorite uncle had gotten sick, and he decided to spend a few days visiting with him and his aunt. One night, he was up late in the living room flicking through TV channels when he watched this woman dressed in black and wearing a long veil over her head come out of the kitchen to enter my uncle's room. He thought that maybe it was a nurse at first, but when he checked, there was no woman there. His uncle passed away 5 days later. I felt my stomach actually drop to the ground hearing his encounter. I shared my experience, and we all decided it was too much of a coincidence. We started asking other relatives and learned that the woman in black has been with the family as far back as anyone can remember. A great aunt who was 96 was told the story by her grandmother. She turns up when there is going to be a death. Some believe her to be some kind of guardian of our family, and there is nothing to fear. But who is she? How does she know there is going to be a death in the family? Why is she visiting?